Shalom, and welcome to ARS Biblica, the Art of the Bible. I'm your host, Steve Finley, and together with Pastor Jeffrey Ernestine of Houston's Second Christian Church, we're having conversations about the over third of the Bible that is poetry. Good morning, Jeffrey.
Good morning. So glad to be here again.
Glad to have you back at the table.
So we've been talking quite a lot about the poetic aspects of the Bible and trying to build what we've been calling a kind of a toolkit of poetic understanding, because one of the struggles that a person might have as they're coming to the text of Scripture is that if the person doesn't understand how poetry works, there's a lot of it that's going to feel very foreign.
Right.
And so we've talked about poetic structure, we've talked about metaphor and allusion and all those sorts of things. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about today was the poetic technique of personification. And you know personification.
Yes.
But the idea is that the writer takes a concept, something from the natural world, an idea, and turns it, so to speak, into a person.
Yes.
And allows you then to think of that idea or that object as a person. And so we were talking about how Shakespeare does that.
All the time.
So,
All the time.
For instance, in a very small way, Juliet, talking to Romeo, tells him, "Square not by the moon, the inconstant moon, who nightly changes in her circled orb." And why is the moon a woman, right? A woman who changes her mind all the time. Well, because the word moon in Greek and Roman, which is kind of the background of Romeo and Juliet, is Greek and Roman mythology. They're in Verona. Is a feminine word, and so then the moon is feminine. Right? Well, in the text of Scripture, particularly in the Proverbs, there are these poems that personify wisdom, in Hebrew, chokmah, as a beautiful woman. So, for instance, you meet it right almost at the beginning in Proverbs chapter 1.
Proverbs 1, verses 20 to 33. Wisdom shouts in the streets. She cries out in the public square. She calls out to the crowds along the main street and to those in front of City Hall. "You simpletons," she cries. "How long will you go on being simple-minded? How long will you mockers relish your mocking? How long will you fools fight the facts? Come here and listen to me. I'll pour out the spirit of wisdom upon you and make you wise. I called you so often, but you didn't come. I reached out to you, but you paid no attention. You ignored my advice and rejected the correction I offered, so I will laugh when you are in trouble. I will mock you when disaster overtakes you, when calamity overcomes you like a storm, when you are engulfed by trouble, and when anguish and distress overwhelm you. I will not answer when they cry for help. Even though they anxiously search for me, they will not find me. For they hated knowledge and chose not to fear the Lord. They rejected my advice and paid no attention when I corrected them. That is why they must eat the bitter fruit of living their own way. They must experience the full terror of the path they have chosen. For they are simpletons who turn away from me to death. They are foolish, and their own complacency will destroy them. But all who listen to me will live in peace and safety, unafraid of harm.
It's a self-contained unit. And it's headed by this idea of wisdom as this woman who is out in the streets. Well, that's not a place normally a woman would be in that culture, out in the streets. But she's in the market raising her voice. And the idea is like she's selling, right? She's advertising, but the wares that she's attempting to bring to market, so to speak, are wisdom, good ideas, right? Prudence, well thought out things.
Interesting image, the marketplace of ideas.
It is. It's exactly that. That's the idea. In this opening chapter of Proverbs, we're meeting wisdom. And the idea is, and there are several of these wisdom poems in Proverbs. You know, everybody thinks of Proverbs as these little short sayings, and there's a bunch of that in there. But the short sayings, the 1 and 2 verse sayings, don't actually begin until chapter 10 of Proverbs. So you're almost a third of the way into the book before you get those little aphorisms. The opening 9 chapters of Proverbs are these series of poems, and about 3, maybe 4 of them are about Lady Wisdom. And there's a kind of an interesting agenda there that you can understand then also from other poets who use personification. Because the idea is that Proverbs is written to make wisdom attractive. You see, so the idea is that if we're writing Proverbs and we're attempting to impart wisdom, it's like older men attempting to impart wisdom to younger men. The sort of subtext then is, wisdom is beautiful, fall in love with her.
Boy, we could use more of it.
Well, that's for certain. And then, so throughout the Proverbs, there's this sort of growing theme. You get over in chapter 8 of Proverbs. And it's a long poem. I'm not going to read the whole thing, right? But it's a long poem where wisdom speaks. And she speaks of herself as God's companion. As God's companion even in creation. That God himself used wisdom to create the universe. And then in chapter...
You know, there's something fascinating here because, you know, I was just kind of thinking about the idea we're talking about, personification. If you peel back the surface of that, what is the writer really doing when it personifies? I was thinking of that passage from Richard II
yes.
about death, where he says, "For within the hollow crown that rounds the mortal temples of a king keeps death his court, and there the antic sits, scoffing his state and grinning at his pomp, allowing him a breath, a little scene to monarchize, be feared and kill with looks, infusing him with self and vain conceit, as if this flesh which walls about our life were brass impregnable. And humor thus comes at the last, and with a little pin bores through his castle wall. And farewell, king." And when I think about how deeply Shakespeare has considered this from the point of view of the monarch, and then to personify death, to create death as a character that has motives, and, you know, that's a very deep kind of examination. And the personification gives you the right to assign something like death a personality.
Exactly. And what is the personality of death in that passage? Well, he himself is a king. He sits enthroned, right? What is he like? Well, he's mocking. He lets out the line a little bit, lets you have some time.
Makes you think you're all that.
And then how easily, like how powerfully and easily he just spoils it all with a little pen.
Effortless.
Right. And that picture then, it gives you information about death that you wouldn't have otherwise.
And it's got other things woven into it. There's an irony woven into that, and there's all of these multi-textured ideas kind of packed into this person who is death. And
Exactly.
and for some reason, humanizing it in that way makes us understand it in a deeper fashion.
Well, you don't, if you think about death in the abstract, you don't understand the resentment that people have about it. But if you
Right,
think
how
about it,
angry people are. I always laugh about that with Woody Allen because Woody Allen, all his characters are just terrified of death and hypochondriacs and, you know.
but if you personify it, then you have this idea. Well, that's like it gives you a target for your resentment. It gives you
Right.
it gives you someone.
We have more practice resenting people.
Right, exactly. Well, in the same way, then in the text, you get the beauty of wisdom and how attractive wisdom is in a way that you wouldn't feel it if wisdom is just this abstract being, this abstract idea. But if wisdom is a woman who can be interacted with, and that was part of it, was that the rabbis, the ancient scholars, had that experience of just how idiosyncratic wisdom is, just how much it's its own thing. You can try to massage your ideas. You can try to manipulate the truth, but wisdom is very stubbornly itself, in exactly the way a person is very stubbornly himself or herself. Mm-hmm. In fact, in chapter 9, then, of Proverbs, we meet another personification set opposite wisdom. So there's Lady Wisdom, then there's also the woman Folly. And you get a comparison. They are depicted, in fact, it's a very elaborate poetic conceit in chapter 9 of Proverbs. They're depicted as living across the street from one another at the top of a hill.
Nice.
And each of them is calling to people who pass by, come into my house. And so wisdom invites people into her house to eat with her, and then folly invites people into her house. And her call is, whoever is simple, let him turn in here. Stolen water is sweet, and bread eaten in secret is pleasant. But he does not know, this is the final line of the poem, that the dead are there, that her guests are in the depths of Sheol. So, so there's this great picture of these two abstract beings, wisdom and folly, but you get in the poem a sense of their character, a sense of what they're like.
That's what that's what I was talking about personality.
Right.
That it's not just, wisdom and folly. There are personalities involved, and we see ourselves kind of mirrored.
But one of the things that's really important there is that the idea that folly is also attractive.
Oh, good Lord.
And that it's important to recognize that wisdom is attractive, but there's an attractiveness to folly too. And so
that's why the Proverbs writer, presumably Solomon, or
well, we don't. That's the thing. Solomon is the author of parts of Proverbs, but parts of Proverbs are anonymous.
like the Psalms. This
Right.
would be a compilation of wisdom material.
Exactly.
And I know you've said before, and I always found it very interesting, that wisdom was kind of a sport.
It was. In fact, we can refer to it as the wisdom enterprise. And it was considered to be this thing that if you knew someone who was good at wisdom, you would go out of your way, if you knew what you were at, you would go out of your way to go find out what kind of wisdom this person has and see whether their wisdom is as good as your wisdom. And
That's the famous story with the Queen of Sheba.
Exactly.
Coming to Solomon.
Because she'd heard about his wisdom.
She'd heard about it and wanted to partake.
And that's the thing, is she has her own, because she's also a monarch, and so she comes to test his wisdom with her wisdom.
Right.
And it was a game. It was something that courtiers and noblemen and monarchs who wanted to be something more than just a thug, something more than just a strong man. Well, how do you do that? Well, you get a reputation for wisdom. That's how you do it. And so there is not just here in the Bible.
It's an interesting, it's an interesting way to make that case to me. Here we are in Proverbs in a poetic setting, and we've set, once again, another one of the devices that we've mentioned before is antithesis. And here we've set the antithesis up. All those wonderful lines about the good woman does this, and the foolish woman tears her house down with her own hands, and
Right.
and the way that's set up, and even coming at those scriptures from a masculine perspective, we recognize the both the attractiveness but attractiveness and desirability are not necessarily the same thing.
Well, it's plain, again, coming from a masculine point of view, that a woman who's attractive isn't necessarily someone you want to spend your whole life with.
Right.
You've known, and I have too,
Yes.
attractive women who would not have made good life partners.
Right.
And that's part of the story here that's being set up in chapter 9 of Proverbs. But one of the things that's interesting, I'm glad you mentioned the Queen of Sheba, is that unlike other royal pursuits like hunting or war, wisdom is kind of equal opportunity.
Yeah.
So that you could have a queen and her gig is wisdom, and that made her a good queen, even if she was delegating war to her generals, and even if she didn't go out lion hunting or whatever, the pharaohs did. That the fact that she was bound up in this wisdom enterprise, and that I
love what you were saying about the image of someone hawking their wares. It reminds me of my years at the Renaissance Festival, and some of those folks, to attract people into their booth, they were incredibly engaging and funny, and I love the idea that wisdom is something valuable, but you're not going to sit on your hands and wait for people to come to it. You're going to extol its virtues.
Well, and in fact, in that poem, in chapter 9, the woman wisdom has the same basic cry, whoever is simple, let him turn in here, just like the woman folly does. Except what she says is,
Proverbs 9, verses 5 and 6. To those without good judgment she says, come, eat my food, and drink the wine I have mixed. Leave your foolish ways behind, and begin to live. Learn how to be wise.
and one of the things that I like about that, if you are a Christian and you read that, the minute that you read, come eat of my bread and drink of the wine I have mixed, that becomes a Eucharistic image.
Absolutely. I mean, it just leaps off the page. How many years before Christ was this written?
Nearly a millennia.
Okay, nearly a millennia before Christ, and the central image, the bread and the cup,
are already there. Well, and the degree to which, and this is a fault of 21st century Protestantism. I have a bee in my bonnet about this. But part of the fault of 21st century Protestantism is that our Eucharistic practice is impoverished because we don't bring in these Old Testament images, so that when you come to the table and there's the bread and the cup, you don't recognize, I have entered wisdom's house, and I'm
sitting at wisdom's table,
and that the Eucharistic table, the table of Christ, is wisdom's table. Now,
I've always had in the back of my head that scripture that says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom.
Well, and this is there's a New Testament idea here as well, in that the Apostle Paul refers to Christ as the wisdom of God.
So Christ becomes the personification of wisdom.
In the New Testament, yes.
Wow. Wow.
And so you have this idea, and you know, it's difficult with a personification, because the temptation with personification is always to imbue the personification with an unnecessary degree of reality. Is the woman wisdom a real woman? No. Like, you can't, she doesn't have an address in Jerusalem, right? You can't go knock on her door and say,
I can see Miss Wisdom.
Yes, I'd like, is Hokmah at home today, right? So is she a real woman? No. Is she real?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, wisdom is real in the same way as, and we've said this before, in the same way that numbers are real. You can't point to 4. You can't weigh out a pound of 5.5. You can't put 17 in a test tube and do experiments with it. But numbers are real in the sense that they point to something real. Wisdom is real. Wisdom exists. The wisdom of God is a real thing. And what the New Testament does is take all of this material and give it flesh in the person of Jesus, so that Jesus becomes, and it can make people very uncomfortable, because in the Old Testament, wisdom is feminine, is a woman, and then in the New Testament we're told Christ is wisdom. Well, is Christ feminine? Well, no, and yes.
Right.
In that same way.
Right.
But you have...
And I, you said something a few episodes back that's been stuck in my mind, and that is that wisdom being couched in poetry gives this meaning that we would not, if we were reading that in prose, first of all, we wouldn't find the poetic comparison very fascinating in prose. We'd think it was a little overdrawn. But in poetry, since we're using heightened language, all those images are mixing together anyway. And I love the fact that when we think about, because wisdom and intelligence are not the same
Oh,
thing.
no.
I know very, very many really intelligent people that could use an adult dose of wisdom.
Well, and that's fairly clear, that you can know a lot of things and have a lot of intelligence and still be sort of an idiot. I've known plenty of such people.
I had a friend years ago. I was in a conversation, and we were talking about music, and I said something about, and they very proudly told me. They said, "Oh, well, I go to the symphony all the time. I have season tickets." I said, "You do?" I said, "What programs are they playing these days?" She goes, "Oh, well, I go to the pops. I don't really like classical music, so I go to the pop symphony." And she was a very dear friend of mine, and I turned to her and I said, I don't know if I would be so ready to exhibit my lack of appreciation for a library of music that is astonishing in its artistry.
The thing is, and yes, but the thing is...
But see, I feel that way about people who dog on poetry.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. The thing is that classical music is a lot like poetry, in that they're hard. Poetry is hard. And it would be very easy. I think I've mentioned this. I've had conversations with young people when we're talking about biblical poetry.
Right.
And what is it saying? Well, what it's saying is that wisdom is attractive. You are invited to partake. Folly is also attractive, but it ends in death. And then the kid will be like, well, why doesn't it just say that?
Right.
Well, because it's not memorable, for one thing. The point of the poem is that you go away and you think about it. And it ramifies, it grows limbs, it stretches out into other directions, it connects to other things.
I always felt that in the theater, that if I can get the restaurants around my theater full of people after a show having dessert and coffee and talking about what they just went through, that's, to me, That's the ultimate landing of the theatrical experience. And unfortunately, Jeffrey, we're running out of time. We're going to come back to this topic and keep at it. But thank you so much. And thank you for joining us on Ars Biblica, the art of the Bible. We wish you knowledge and blessings for all your days.